It is December 11th, 2023, and the last week in Ukraine has seen some really extreme updates. The Russians have managed to advance quite far in several locations on the battlefield. In addition to that, there are also other attacks and geolocations all across the front that I have for you guys today. In addition, we're going to talk about some information concerning Ukrainian issues with manpower and issues with ammunition, which appear to play very much into they're big factors in Russia's recent advances. So first, we're going to zoom in and we're going to talk about Bakhmut. As you can see in the area of Bakhmut, there's been quite a few Russian advances in the last week or so. In fact, this has been one of the worst weeks for Ukraine in terms of territory lost on the year. So we're going to start with the area of Bogdanovka. We actually have quite a bit going on here. First, the Russians managed to advance somewhat north of the town of Bogdanovka, which let's go ahead and get the layers on here so we can see the village names, managing to capture part of this road that connects Grigorovka and Bogdanovka together, as well as some of that forested area there. Another forested area captured right in here. This is actually kind of a gulch or a valley approaching Grigorovka, so in a way this kind of dilutes what the target could be, or it could suggest that the Russian target's actually both towns of Bogdanovka and Grigorovka. Along with that, there has been a recent post actually before after I got done marking the map up here, there was something shared by Remy Lind on Telegram from another account. I'm not sure what this account is here, but it shows an advance into Bogdanovka. The text, which is, I think it's in, I can't tell if it's Russian or Ukrainian, but it says, our troops have entered the northeastern outskirts of Bogdanovka, so I guess that's Russian. This is unconfirmed information here, but it certainly is a possibility. Just keep it in the back of your mind that the Russians might already be entering into Bogdanovka. Along with that, the Russians managed to push up and capture a good amount of territory. This is the former ground of the very violent assaults that were going on and the battles that were going on the flanks of Bakhmut back in March and April. A lot of this is former Russian positions to begin with. Like in this specific area, the Russians had actually once occupied this bit of territory and were pushing up on this little intersection here. Other parts of it are places that the Russians have never been before. As you can see here, there's a pre-war trench network here. This is probably a pretty big fortified position since the battle approached this area. I'm sure these trench networks have been expanded massively. The Russians have never occupied this before, so the Russians are rapidly moving into territory they've never had. We actually do have some geolocations for this. This one coming from Deep State UA. And I believe this should be just a picture, so it should load up here for us. No, it's a video, so we'll go ahead and bring it up right here. We're not really going to play very much of it because this is a video of Ukrainian forces destroying Russian armored and infantry personnel with FPV drones, which there's actually a trend here. You're going to see some of the geolocations we have throughout the video of Ukrainian troops destroying Russian forces, but this places the Russians at a pretty advanced position, actually right here in the center of these fields, actually closer to this line here than what I have that geolocation. So to go along with this, this is the statement from Ukraine's Deep State UA. This is a heavily pro-Ukrainian source, so this definitely goes along with the mapping that's been given by Russian sources. They actually map out pretty much the same thing, but they say the enemy is advancing west of Bakhmut in several places at once. Infantry groups and equipment are already fixed east of Bogdanovka, which indicates the advance of the enemy. Unfortunately, successful enemy assaults were recorded at the height of the 188.6. That's a meter sea level measurement, so one of these heights is at that level. Near Kromove, on the footage distributed by the enemy, you can see the landing party, which was not Nothing was done about them, and they're consolidating the positions. In addition, the Russians' success between Bakhmut and Ivanovsky, the height of 144, was lost. Further progress was stopped. The events took place at the beginning of December, but only now did it make sense to make changes. In the future, the Russians will continue to try to advance from Bakhmut into Ivanovka, but the main impact will most likely be on the road from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar. The loss of the height 199.4 will maximally spoil the conditions for defense in the direction of Ivanovka. A little further to the west begins a ridge and a great height on which Chasiv Yar already stands. Unlike Bakhmut, the city is already strategically important for the defense of the Kramatorsk agglomeration. So, that was a mouthful, but I'm going to try to show you guys on the map what they're talking about. I believe the 188 height that they're talking about is either this position here or this position over here, closer to where that geolocation is. I'm not exactly sure. The 144 that they're talking about, and outside of Deep State UA, I'm not sure if anyone's actually mapped this out yet, is right here in the middle of this field. There's kind of a little ridge line that goes through here. It's not the highest point in this field, but it's the highest, or the highest point on this line. As you can see, that's over here closer to the main road. But there is a hilltop kind of right here-ish. That's directly situated between Bakhmut and Ivanovka. So that's where the Russians have advanced to. Now, what they're talking about once the 199 hill is lost, they're talking about the top of the ridge here where this cemetery is located, as well as this intersection here. Once this is lost, the Russians will have a clean view down into Ivanovka and will be able to advance and probably push the Ukrainians out of that town. So this is actually a pretty dire situation for the Ukrainian defense of Ivanovka. Ivanovka is under more threat than it was at any point during the Battle of Bakhmut. During the Battle of Bakhmut, they had secured the flanks, the northeastern flanks, I guess you can say. To the south of the town, the Russians were pushing up through these fields, but they never really got close enough to enter the town and prevent its use as a logistical hub. Now, at this point, and the other thing is, with the south, there was never really a good visual advantage over the town for the Russians. From the north side of the town, if the Russians do manage to take this hill, then the town and the road here is going to be under some pretty serious threat. In addition, to the south of Bakhmut, this is a big emergency situation for the Ukrainians. A recent Russian assault led to the recapture of the fortifications above the town. So now the Ukrainian group inside Klishchivka is actually pinned on 3 different sides, stuck inside that town. They have no direct access to Ivanovka. They have to go around in order to get reinforcements in through there. And, you know, Ivanovka, of course, is important because Chasiv Yar is the main base of operations. It's thought that Ukraine distributes forces across this entire front from the point of Chasiv Yar. Now, when you get further to the south, of course, in the area of Andriivka, the Ukrainians have probably placed some kind of bridge crossing. I'm sure this bridge here is destroyed, but some kind of mobile crossing in order to get troops across the canal. So, I'm going to go ahead and bring up just kind of, you know, where the assumed Ukrainian defensive lines are, just to show what's more or less what's going on here. The Ukrainians are currently defending hilltops and the entrances to towns. As you can see here, this one to the far right, and then this one right here. These are both hilltops that cover forested areas, and then, of course, defending into the town. So it looks here that there's some concern that Russia might both enter into Bogdanovka and enter into Grigorovka. You know, whether they can do that without capturing these hilltops first, who really knows? Either way, if the Russians end up deciding to turn north towards Grigorovka, capture this area, and push all the way up to the canal zone, then there's going to be some pretty serious threat of the Russians just sweeping around and wrapping up Ukrainian defenses. So the Ukrainians probably are putting reinforcements in this area to try and prevent that from happening. In the center, of course, this hilltop is you know, direly important. Either way, if the Russians aren't under any immediate chance of capturing this hilltop, they are going to start being able to move in this direction through these fields, just building new trench lines, moving into some of these forested areas, moving into Ukrainian trenches that are already there. Now that they have troops stationed closer to the top of the hill that can see some of these areas, they can provide covering fire and allow those troops to move up. So this is a very bad situation for the Ukrainians on this front line. And it appears like part of the reason for the position the Ukrainians are in now is because of what's going on in Avdiivka. Now, Avdiivka, we'll get to that in a minute. The Russians have slowed their advance there, but there is a serious amount of artillery and air power that's being used to thin out Ukrainian troops. So Ukraine is being forced to move troops from other fronts to combat that. And it seems like Bakhmut was one of the big areas that they drew troops from. Of course, most recently, Ukraine's most recent big advances in terms of their offensive were down here in the south towards Andriivka and Klishchiivka. So just kind of using logic here, it seems like they probably had some offensive troops in the area, and they decided to pull those off the line first in order to reinforce Avdiivka. Sorry, I was blanking on the name. And then probably more troops have been pulled from other places that the Russians have ended up pushing in now. So it definitely seems like Ukraine is short on troops. So just to kind of go over what's been going on so you guys can get the seriousness of what's going on in Bakhmut. Since December started, Russia has advanced a total of almost 9 square kilometers, but since October they've advanced 22 square kilometers. So quite big advances going on the front in Bakhmut. So just a better view of what's going on there without all the nonsense. Quite a bit of gains. Now to the north of Bakhmut, this kind of also plays into what's going on with Ukraine having to divert resources from other parts of the front in order to fend off these Russian offenses. The Russians have pushed forward towards Siversk and made some progress. This down here near Razdolovka, this was formerly under Russian control. Ukrainian counterattack had pushed the Russian lines back here towards Yakovlivka, but now the Russians have recaptured it. In addition, right here above Vesel, this is ground that the Russians, if they have occupied it before, it's been since long before the Battle of Bakhmut started. Further to the north, the Russians continue to advance on Yampovlivka and Terny. That's, obviously, I think, is that the same name? Oh, Yakovlivka versus Yampovlivka. So this is in the Liman area. So the Russians also pushing on Liman. And then we do have some information coming from Ukrainian sources about Russian forces advancing in the area of Kupiansk. Now, we don't have any mappable changes there, but the Russians are pushing on this front as well. This is a video of another FPV drone strike. So, further to the south, we're going to get into what's going on in Avdiivka. The Russians have pushed once again and recaptured this old rail station here. They'd initially pushed up and captured it, and the Ukrainian counterattack had pushed them back out. It appears they've now advanced back into that position. The Russians continue to push towards the coke plant, which there is actually some geolocated footage here of Ukrainian forces going after Russian troops with FPV drones and artillery strikes and whatnot, but I did not get that image posted into the video. There is a geolocation, though, of drone footage that shows heavy fighting going on in these dachas in this area here. This is one of the reasons why I can't stand Google Earth. Just because it's not really loading. You guys can kind of see it up here in the corner. This comes from Deep State UA as well. Interesting trend with Deep State UA. The last couple weeks, the posts, which, this is a heavily pro-Ukrainian source, the posts have gotten more and more negative, I guess you can say. They're admitting to losses on the front, problems on the front, struggles holding back the Russians. There's quite a bit there. The videos that they share are still all very much, with pro-Ukrainian twist. It's all videos of Ukrainian troops killing Russian troops, Of course, that's what both sides end up posting. But interesting enough, from their mapping here, they actually mapped that the Russians have advanced a little bit southwest from Kamyanka and towards this reservoir right here. So that's actually in the corner of this map that for some reason is not loading. Now, further to the south, the Russians allegedly have advanced into this quarry area and secured this whole eastern side of this ravine. Now, we don't really have any geolocated evidence of that as of yet, so hopefully that will come forward in time, or we can get some geolocated evidence of the Russians somewhere else that can confirm that. Now, further to the south, there is some more. This is, another post from Deep State UA, basically admitting to the bad situation in Marinka. It says a video appeared where two men raised a flag on the western outskirts of Marinka, this time somewhat further north than the last. Heavy fighting continues outside the city. The Russians use both convoys of equipment and tactics of small groups. At the moment, the line of confrontation is being clarified, but the fact of advancement, unfortunately, is present. So another negative post from Deep State UA admitting to a bad situation in Marinka. They claim the flag was put somewhat more north. I couldn't even tell really in their image where this flag was, but it could be in this area here or in the northernmost part of the town. Of course, most sources have this all mapped out as under Russian control, but I do not yet. I haven't seen the evidence of that. I do think, though, that the Russians truly do occupy a position right here. Then that completely cuts, affects Ukraine's ability, because it gives them sight of this road, affects Ukraine's ability to move reinforcements and ammunition back into this town here. So, further to the south, another Deep State UA piece of information about a negative deteriorating situation in Novomihailovka. The situation near Novomihailovka continues to deteriorate. The situation has worsened to such an extent that radar convoys are already entering the eastern outskirts of the village. So far, it is possible to destroy them, but further defense is complicated by the fact that LBZ there has been stable for more than a year since the paratroopers saved the collapse of a 15-kilometer strip that collapsed after complications in the defense of one of the brigades. For a long time, the intelligence of both sides already knows where those SPs and VOPs are, but due to the saturation of artillery since the summer, the Russians are able to dismantle a significant part of our positions. So in that post, there's actually geolocated images of destroyed Russian convoys and equipment at this intersection that you see right here in the center. So I've gone ahead and moved the front line up to there. Now, down in Rivne, there's quite a bit of fighting going on. It appears the Russians are trying to push back in and retake Rivne. It's a slow roll. Some Russian sources have claimed that the defenses at the south part of the town have already been recaptured. Area that was just very recently lost to the Ukrainians, and these tree lines and fields here was recaptured. Now, the Ukrainians, the Deep State UA, has also posted their own geolocation here as well, which for some reason isn't showing up, but they show destroyed Russian vehicles and Russian troops that are being attacked right here at the intersection of this tree line and this road. However, they mention in their statement that they give a geolocation of Russian soldiers there, but then they mention that their troops were able to push the Russians back out of the position without providing any evidence of that. So I've marked this as under Russian control until definitively we know for certain whether that's the truth. This is just all around bad for Ukraine. As you can see, they're losing ground all over the front line. They're probably moving troops. Every time they move troops off a section of the front to defend another section, the Russians decide to attack right there. Of course, throughout the war, we've seen the Russians launch probing attacks on all different sections of the front just to test the weakness of the Ukrainian army. But it appears that, if you launch a probing attack and you end up capturing ground, even when that wasn't the intent, then, those commanders are going to keep pushing and keep going. And I think that's a bit of what we're seeing with some of these attacks is just typical Russian probing attacks that aren't really expected to have any kind of a success, but because of the weakness of the Ukrainian position right now, the Russians are seeing gains. A couple, a kilometer here, a kilometer there. It's nothing too serious. We're not talking about any major breakthroughs here, but we might be, if the situation is as bad or as worse than it seems right now, and the Russians have ample reserves to throw into the fight. Let's say if the Russians had 100,000 men stationed somewhere else on the border, they could, launch an incursion. And with the way things are going on the current front line, it's hard to believe the Ukrainians would have the resources to stop it. Now, finally, talking about Krinky, heavy Russian bombardment and just horrific stories coming from this area here. It does appear like Russia is starting to move forces into the area to actually retake the town, but at the moment, the stories are that there's a lot of Ukrainian troops surrendering. Most of them have frostbite, gangrene, of course, from getting wet, crossing the river, and then ending up in kind of a hopeless situation inside of Krinky. I guess, that story is that they're just surrendering in order to get medical care or whatever from the Russian side. So this, to me, I just don't see any other way to see this situation other than just a fire bag. The Russians it appears like they're basically allowing the Ukrainians to cross just so they can shoot at them. So, as my analysis is that there's no chance that Ukraine can expand this bridgehead. This is already, they should be withdrawing from here as soon as they can. The fact that they haven't seems a little bit silly. Now, one thing that you've noticed, that you might have noticed if we got to expand these pictures in some of these videos, all of these geolocations that is being provided by pro-Ukrainian sources, they're showing FPV drones. They're not showing artillery strikes on Ukrainian or on Russian forces. They're showing FPV strikes, and the word is that Ukraine is desperately low on 155 millimeter artillery shells. Not only that, but they're low on funding, so they can't really buy 155 millimeter artillery shells if they were even available. And I was looking at some prices here because this is saying that the price of a single 155 millimeter shell has raised dramatically to somewhere around $8,500 for a single shell, and compared to the U.S. paying about $3,000 for a shell. So that's quite a bit of money for a single artillery shell. And the stories come out of the front suggest that Ukraine has, basically certain artillery crews are only using about 5 shells a day. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. That seems it seems like an exaggeration based on an average. Like on average, maybe that's how many shells is available a day, which I would assume that rather than giving each team 5 shells, you would just give one team 20 shells and let them shell a position. It just doesn't make sense that it's spread out. But, regardless, the story is that Ukraine is using FPV strikes in place of artillery strikes. So they'll get a couple guys, a squad of guys, 6 or 7 people at once. They'll have an FPV drone, and they'll try to hammer a Russian position with as many drones as they can in order to slow the Russians down. Now, this sounds absolutely desperate, which I'm sure it is, because an FPV drone probably doesn't have the same kind of power that a artillery shell has, especially with most of these having RPGs strapped to them. It's, RPG is not as strong as an artillery shell, but there are some advantages to it. First off, accuracy is a big advantage, which, this brings us back. It's basically like having miniature Excalibur shells. If the drone pilot is, hitting his target every time, there is an increased potential and accuracy there. The other thing is actually cost. If this is correct, this is an article by Forbes on FPV drones used in Ukraine, and these are Pegasus FPV kamikaze drones. They're known for their red motors that are on the on their propellers. And they mentioned that they're significantly cheaper than most other options. So a drone like a Switchblade drone that's intended for destroying tanks costs about 60 grand, while these Pegasus FPV drones cost about $341, or a more powerful version at $462. I am somewhat skeptical that that's actually the price. Perhaps maybe these FPV drones are really just very short range drones. Just on my experience with looking into drones and their range and their price, maybe these are just bare bones drones designed simply for the military purpose and meant to be as cheap as possible. But I would guess that some of these FPV drones that Ukraine's using is in upwards of several $1,000s. Nevertheless, if you're paying anywhere between $500 and $3,000 for an FPV drone, it's a cost-effective replacement for a 155 millimeter artillery shell. So, that's one positive to it. A big negative to it would be supply chain issues with these drones. I highly doubt that you can produce as many FPV drones as you could artillery shells. I mean, an artillery shell is, you have your own problems with increasing production. Like, you have to build new facilities that can, mass produce them. But once you're mass producing them, it's just, a hunk of metal with explosives and gunpowder. It doesn't have moving parts to it. It's a lot easier to make in mass compared to a drone. So, either way, things are looking bad for Ukraine in the Bakhmut area. Just to close it out, quick update. Russians closing in on Grigorovka, Russians closing in on Bogdanovka, Russians closing in on the Ukrainian hilltops, protecting Chasiv Yar and Ivanovka. The Russians rapidly advancing on Klishchivka, probably going to see Ukrainian troops pull out of here if they can't retake this trench network at the top of the hill. So, very bad things going on for Ukraine in the Bakhmut area. All right, guys, that's it for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.